Hello everybody. So I promised when I started a new project I was going to do another tutorial video so I could show you exactly how I begin a new project on the diagonal with my method of stitching. If you haven't watched my other videos before, my basic overview is that I work from the top left corner down towards the lower right. I don't necessarily work in rows. I just work along the diagonal edge. My biggest thing is I try to avoid from closing in unstitched squares, as I find it is harder to get your needle up when the stitch is sort of surrounded by other stitches that you need to do. It can be harder, especially on higher counts, to get your needle up through there. And I also find it just looks a little neater. It doesn't disturb the other stitches around it as much. So that is why I developed this method. And I generally do the stitches that are above and to the left before doing the stitches that are below and to the right, because of the way I do my diagonals. So as I said, it's from the upper left towards the lower right. You could start in any corner that you wish to. It's up to you. You'll just, of course, have to adjust accordingly. This is just how I do it. All right, so I'm going to get started here. So right in the upper corner, and the first stitch is 797. So generally when I stitch, I don't cross as I go, because that's just the way I've always done it. I like to stitch a bunch of bottom legs and then stitch the top legs. You can cross as you go. It's totally up to you. Some people swear by it, say that it's neater. I haven't really noticed a difference. They also say it can help avoid lines, but I haven't really had a problem with lines. So your mileage may vary. Just, I always say there's no rules. These are just guidelines that I do. Oops. Really, my only rule when I stitch is that when I park a stitch, I always park in the same spot. So I always park in the upper right corner for me. That way, it's less confusing, because the problem was I would sometimes park in the lower left corner, and then I could end up with two threads coming out of the same hole if it was parked that way, and I could get confused as to which was which. Sometimes they would end up sort of wrapped around each other like that when you went to stitch them, and so it made things look kind of wonky and funny. So that is really my only rule, is I always park in the same spot. So it doesn't really matter which corner that you choose, just be consistent with it. Okay, just gonna, don't want to sew into my grid line there. Not that it really matters. This the stuff I use for gridding, you can't pierce it with the needle, so it slides out afterwards. So that is the first stitch. Okay, so we have done that first stitch, and then we are parking it here. This app I'm using is called Pattern Keeper for Android. Highly recommend it. I would not try to do this parking method without it. And I have a link in the description box as to where you can find it. I also made an overview video of features of Pattern Keeper, which I will also provide a link to in case you are curious. All right, so 796. So I find with this method, because I leave my needles generally threaded in the area I'm using them, it doesn't take that long to switch colors. What does seem to sort of take the longest is ending off threads and attaching new ones. Once I have sort of a bunch of threads attached, it goes quite quickly. However, because I'm not leaving gaps, I find it a little bit faster in the long run, because I'm not having to go in and search out those, stitches that I skipped and then trying to find them later. And I actually had a project I finished once, and I had left one of the stitches uncrossed, and I didn't notice until it was too late. It was all mounted and everything, and I couldn't take it apart to fix it. So it's there forever, mocking me. Okay. Oh Goodness, having trouble finding the spot here. Okay. And then again, parking in the upper right when I next do that stitch. Okay, so now I'm going to switch back to the first color here. Over the next few rows, you'll see I'll start to establish the diagonal edge here. Right, so those are done and it is parked again. Okay, so time for another color. Sometimes with this method, I end up with more than one thread of the same color, as I often don't want to sort of cross back and forth and jump around. Leave a lot of carries on the back, which makes it messier, wastes a bit more thread. So yeah, depending on the pattern, I can often end up with more than one thread of the same color in an area, and that's just how I do it. Again, you may prefer to just use the same thread. It's up to you. Okay. So sometimes with this, especially when you're in a high confetti area, you can sort of end up you do a stitch, park it, switch to another color, do one more stitch, park it. Sometimes that's how it works out. But like I said, as I leave things threaded, I find it doesn't really take that much more time to sort of drop one needle and pick up the next one. Okay. Just try to avoid stitching over my grid line because it is easier to remove later if it's not all covered by stitches. But if I do cover it, it's not a big deal. Okay, so now I'm going to attach another thread of this color here. I also made another video about how I begin and end all my threads from the front of the work. That I find just makes it easier not having to turn it then, and you're less likely to get tangles if you're, always flipping your work upside down to access the back. Then yeah, you could end up with a lot more tangles. It saves a little time as well if I don't have to turn my work. Forming a knot on the other side, so just smooth that out. Okay, and then this one I'm going to park right here. And with that other thread of this color that I did here, what I'm actually going to do is grab myself another magnet. And I'm actually going to unthread that one and tuck it away because it is out of the diagonal, so I won't be touching it for a while. So I don't leave needles on threads forever, just in the area that I'm actively using them. So now we're going to switch back to this color here and do a whole bunch. As this is all on that edge, I'm not closing anything in, so. I often say, I think of my method as almost as if you had a stain sort of spreading across the fabric. That's how I work. Just sort of grows out from there. And as I say, I don't work strictly in rows, just sort of whatever makes sense to me at the time. Whatever is the closest and whatever is going to not close unstitched squares in. Another thing I do is the diagonal line is just sort of a rough guide for me. I don't follow it strictly. So sometimes I go past the line, sometimes I stop before the line, depending on the colors. That's the way I work. I also find if you keep your edge sort of, fuzzy instead of being stick straight, then you're less likely to end up with a line in your work. I haven't had that problem, but, it is a possibility, and that helps you avoid it. So as you can see on that last stitch, instead of going from the upper left down, I went from the bottom up, so that way I could park in that same corner, not confuse myself. Okay, so time to add another color. Okay, I have a short little piece of thread here, so I'll use that up since the next instance of using this color is quite far down. I don't really want to carry that far. I carry an inch maximum. I find any more than that, and it takes me less thread to just end off the color and then start a new one later. And also, when you leave really long carries along the back, you could catch and pull them more easily. So there's that as well. You don't want to be distorting your work. So I did these two, and then I'm going to finish this off with pin stitches. So that's where you just sort of come up between the threads and then go back down, and you can see that the fabric almost closes right over them, and you're going to be stitching over those later, so they will be invisible. The only time I don't do that is if I'm pin stitching a very dark color and it's extending into an area that's light colored, because there is a risk that it could show through. Then I change it off a different way or end it off a different way. But other than that, that is how I do it. Okay, so I'm going to do this stitch and then these four, and not the two next to it yet, because that would close in the stitches above them, and I don't want to do that. So I will come back to them after I have done those two stitches above them. So I hope that's starting to make sense to you, how I decide which stitches to do here. Okay, and then actually just going to park it right there, since I kind of like to work from the right in and then back again. Okay, so now we go back to this color. So now I'm going to do that row there. That will take care of those two stitches above this thread that I just parked. That way they didn't get closed in. And then I will do those two stitches with the thread that I just parked. So these 5 here. Sometimes when I have big blocks of color like this too, I will stitch it across several diagonals at once. Again, helps to avoid a line. Don't have to necessarily break it up that way. But as you can see, I'm slowly starting to form sort of a bit of a triangle here. that first diagonal edge. And then again, park it right below. Make sure I mark that I parked it. Now I'm going to switch back to this color again. Okay, do those 2 stitches there. And then I'm going to park it a fair ways, but it's still within an inch. So down here into the next big square of 100 is generally as far as I go. I'm working on 14 count here, so an inch is, you know, not that not very far. If you're working on a smaller count, like say a 25 or 36 count, then you could probably go, you know, 2 or 3 big squares before you hit that inch mark. So again, that is up to you. So again, as you can see with this color, I'm kind of going past that diagonal line, but it just sort of makes sense to do that. So that is what I'm going to do. With big blocks of color, I often end up with more than one thread and they sort of meet in the middle. So what I could do here is continue sort of to stitch and fill in this bit of a triangle here, but because this is all the same color, what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to go back to the top and sort of start the next diagonal line. Some people like to be really strict with their diagonals. It is, again, up to you. I just like to follow the colors, so sometimes my work ends up looking a little less diagonal than others. My last project I was doing had stone pillars that were vertical columns of color. So those parts I ended up stitching, it was almost a column style instead of a diagonal style, because that's just what worked. I like to say I adapt my stitching or my method to the stitching, and rather than my stitching to the method. I don't force it to go diagonal if it just doesn't make sense to me to go diagonal. So okay, so end those off. Sometimes it shows a little bit more, but again, all this is very similar dark colors, so that is not going to show later. It's not going to be a problem because I'm going to cover it up. Okay, so now we're back to this color that I set aside before. I kind of keep a maximum of about 15 needles on threads. I find any more than that and they start to tangle up. I used to do 8 to 10, but I discovered I could actually manage more. So there's some people who do this just with a single needle, but that means a lot more rethreading. So that's why I bought my needles in bulk. I bought a tube of like 100 and then I never run out. Okay, so like I said, I normally like to stitch from the right sort of into the left and back, but to carry it all the way would be, you know, an extra few stitches. So instead of that, I'm going to park it in the left side of this section and just work the other way. So now I'm going to add another thread here, as I don't want to carry that one that I have, and there's a lot of this color, so I would end up using more than one thread anyway. Okay. sometimes what I will do is just keep, oh, there's a knot there. Let's just make sure we undo that first. Oh, if we can. Come on. Oh, are you going to be difficult on me? I have to restart this thread. That happens sometimes. If the knot is not going to cooperate and come out. Yeah. Ah, darn. That is not happening, unfortunately. Yeah. Sometimes that just happens. That thread will not cooperate. And unfortunately, what's left, the amount that's left, is too short for me to end it off. So we are going to end up just pulling these out and trying again. Didn't think that I would be having to rip out stitches this early into a project, but here we are. Not because of a mistake, but just because of a knot. Okay, let's try that again. Oh, look at that, I cut my grid line too. Oh well, that happens sometimes, no big deal. As long as I didn't cut one of my actual stitching threads, I'm happy. Okay, so as this color block is sort of slanting this way, I could either just carry on and do the next row here with this thread until I'm ready to drop it, or, oops, did that by accident, or I can just park it here, switch colors, pick up this thread, do this bit of the row. Totally up to you how you want to do that. So when I park, I try to park based on counting off the grid lines and not counting from already parked threads, because I've discovered if I park one wrong, then that makes me mess up all the next ones. And I'm parking a whole bunch wrong, and that sucks. So. So yeah, this is a smaller pattern I'm doing here. It's less than 50,000 stitches, so for me that's not going to take too long. As I've said before, when I first started cross-stitching, that would have seemed like a huge project, and now, yeah, for me that's a quick one. When you're doing projects that are, you know, over 200, 300,000 stitches, yeah, 50,000 doesn't seem like much. Okay, so I'm going to carry on with this color for a bit. So I showed you the other way where I sort of was working more in rows. And this time I'm going to actually leave this color aside for a bit and work these rows. Yeah, my last project had very few big blocks of color, so I sometimes had like 30 threads parked in one sort of section. So yeah, things could get a bit complex there, but I persevered. Method still works, whether you have many colors or only a few. Okay, so, so I did the next row of 4. I'm going to park this here. And actually, there's a little bit of an end here poking through. So this is a snag tool. It's actually a knitting tool, but it works really well. It's got a roughened edge, and when you do this, it just sort of grabs that loose thread that was coming up from the bottom and pulls it back to the other side. So, as I mentioned before about having threads sort of meeting in the middle, that's what I'm going to do. So, do this thread, do these stitches. And as I've said, both will get used, so it's not a problem. Yeah, juggling multiple threads of the same color is really not that much different from juggling threads of different colors, I find. So and when you're working on a larger count like I am, which is this 14 count, then sort of a 6 or 7 stitch gap between stitches is a lot farther than if you were working on a higher count. So that can also influence whether you want to do separate threads or not. Okay, park 1 stitch shy. So when I end up sometimes having to break up a big block, I don't go 1 stitch shy every row. Sometimes I go 2 and then 1 and sort of keep it a little feathered that way, and then it doesn't cause me problems later. Actually, I'm going to carry on with this thread again because I may stitch until this one runs out and then take over with the other thread. We'll see. So hopefully I'm not boring you too much with these big blocks of color here, but you get the idea. So again, as you can see, we are slowly establishing that diagonal edge. Up the other way again, so I can park in the upper right, but also I find when the hole is really full with other threads, then going down into that hole instead of coming up through it can help keep things from getting pulled out of place, keep things sort of neat instead of pulling the other stitches out of place. And I think I'm going to do these ones, and then this thread will be used up and we will take over with the other thread. So as you can see, I haven't filled in the top part of the diagonal yet. As I said, I don't always work in rows. Sometimes I work from the top down. Sometimes I travel from the bottom up. It just depends on what makes sense to me at the time. The important thing for me is that I'm working out from the established edge without closing stuff in. Well, I might actually be able to get a few more stitches with this one. So actually what I'm going to do, I'm going to park this in the row up here. Oops, there we go. Make sure I mark the correct stitch. And I'm going to use this one. So sometimes I do this when I'm juggling two threads, sort of do one row with one and run one row with another. Oh, look at that. Accidentally went over two stitches. That's not right. Let's try that again. There we go. So as you can see, covering up this pin stitch here with this thread so you will not see it once those stitches are done. Okay, I'm going to actually take a look. Okay, I can actually show you exactly what I mean by some threads travel upwards rather than downwards. They usually travel downwards, but sometimes they travel up when that makes sense. So what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to park this one right here. Okay, I'm going to finish off this thread, this other one of the same color, because yeah, it's a perfect length for just 4 stitches. All right, so that color is done. So I'm going to switch back to this other one that I have parked. Let's tuck this away and do this bunch here. Okay, and then the next row is another 4. Okay, and that is out of the diagonal, so I'm going to tuck it away and unthread it, and I will rethread it when I get there. Okay, so I said I would show you what I meant about the threads traveling up, is I'm going to do it this way. So pick this one back up. But it's still carrying along that established edge, not closing anything in. So I'm still following my my guidelines here. So I could have crossed as I went and then parked the stitch up top, but I'm going to just carry it back down and I will start a new thread when I get to that stitch that's next to this one here. So where I decide to carry a thread depends often on how long the thread is. And yeah, how close the stitches are. Sometimes there's stitches that are closer on one side as opposed to the other, so I will travel the thread there and park it there to the closest one. But sometimes, say if the thread is only long enough for 2 stitches and one area has a whole ton of stitches and the other area only has 2 stitches, I'll carry it back to the one with 2 stitches and use it there. That's sort of the most efficient use of my thread at that point. So, all right, so I did those stitches. I'm going to park that ready to go here, but I'm not going to do that yet because I have this color here that I do not want to close in. So 792. See what I have for threads. Because this is a shorter bit, so I don't really need to attach an entire full-length piece here. I'm going to use up one of my leftover medium-length pieces from another project. I always save those if it's usable. I think the shortest piece I can use is 5 inches. I can still do a loop start and do a single stitch. So I save those for the scattered little confetti stitches. That way I don't have to use up a big one and end up with some leftover pieces again. So, oh, look at that. I can't count. Yep, that was 4 stitches, not 3. Okay, let's see if I can undo this or not. Sometimes I can, sometimes I can't. Sort of depends. When you're coming from the top, it can be a bit trickier. There. But I got it. So yeah, sometimes it's hard to remove and I end up having to cut the thread, but this time I was able to salvage it. So let's try that again. Yeah, so right to the grid line there, not past it, because apparently I cannot count this morning. Okay, there we go. So 3 stitches here. So not a full true diagonal yet, but we will get there, because of course this color goes, the next color sort of goes across several diagonals. So I'm choosing to do it sort of in one go instead of breaking it up. Again, you could choose to break it up and stick to the diagonal more closely, whatever works for you. So as you can see, those pin stitches are covered up. You won't see them anymore. So okay, and then that's parked there, waiting for when I do the next section. Okay. Okay, so I have a choice here. I could carry on with this, and there's a stitch that needs to be done in this color here, but I don't want to close that in. So I could either do these stitches that are here to keep from closing that in, or I could carry on stitching from here and just shift it over to the left and carry on that way. So but I think what I will do is I will sort of go back to the top again. So like I've said, not always working in rows, just sort of along this edge, growing this outwards. Okay, so let's see. So 796. This is another one I think I'm going to grow it up from the bottom instead of the top. Just decide what I want to do. Either that, or I may go adding some more threads. So I hope that's starting to make sense to you. I have other tutorials showing when it was already established, and then this is just, yeah, how I begin. I find when I first started, it was easier to understand seeing it on an already established project, but actually how do I establish it was a little more confusing. So I'm going to go into the third diagonal here, and I'm going to carry it from there. So I'm going to do this, then I'm going to add another of this color here, 797. To be careful, these colors are very similar, so make sure I'm grabbing the correct one. Although I find after I have stitched for a while, I can tell generally when I'm picking up a thread which is which. I've rarely been so mixed up that I kind of had to end off the threads and start again because I couldn't tell which was which, but that's rare. Okay, and then I'm going to go back to this color I just did. It's, I don't know, I think maybe I'll call this hamburger. I kind of named the symbols in my head. As I stitch two-handed, I sometimes will just every few stitches run my finger on the bottom just to double check that there aren't any knots left, because sometimes you can't always tell, and you want to catch those before you've stitched a whole ton around them and can't undo them anymore. Okay, then do the next. Okay, and I'm going to carry this, and I'm actually going to do a little pin stitch to sort of tack it down, as it's a bit of a long carry, and that way that can assure it doesn't pull loose. It'll get stitched over by the other stitches in between, and that'll secure it. And this just sort of makes sure it doesn't accidentally get pulled to the back, because I've done that before, caught it with my finger, and just, yeah, it was very irritating trying to figure out where it was supposed to be parked after that. So yeah, I filled that in, so now this will not close in, those stitches. I would have picked a project with a bit more confetti in the corner to show you, but I really didn't have one ready. A lot of them seem to just have lots of background. My next project is the first 2 pages were almost entirely white, so yeah, I am doing that off camera because that would just be very boring to watch, wouldn't it? So yeah, as you can see, like I said, sometimes when there's a big block of color, I'll go across several sections at once. Then there's no line. And then sort of as this color, as you can see, it sort of breaks into different sections, sort of down over here, down over here. Those will get their own threads as I get to it, and it branches off. So I can keep stitching and show you guys what I mean by that. But hopefully you've sort of got the idea. This one I'm not going to be touching for a bit, so I'm just going to move it to another magnet so it's not getting tangled with these threads I'm using down here. Sometimes I will unthread it, sometimes I'll leave it threaded because I know I'm going to get back to that before I have to move my frame. So yeah, as you can see, like I said, I did those pin stitches around here, which were kind of, they showed a bit more, but as you can see, now that it is completely stitched over, you cannot tell. I'm not even sure exactly where it was. I know it was sort of in that area, but not exactly where, because yeah, it is now hidden by being covered up. As long as there's similar or darker colors in the area you're pin stitching, you don't have to worry. It will not show once it is stitched over, as long as you're doing a full coverage. Obviously, if you were doing an area and that was background, then you wouldn't want to use a pin stitch there because you would see it. Okay, so that thread is done. And I always do my pin stitches in at least 1 centimeter from the edge. That just ensures that the end of it will not accidentally show through if it goes past the edge of your design. I learned that the hard way when I finished a project, and then I had to flip it over and tuck all the ends that were showing from the front towards the back. That was very tedious, so yeah, I try to avoid doing that when I can. Okay, I think I need a new thread for this, for my envelopes. 7, So I keep colors that I'm using a lot out in a working tray, and then I just add new threads to it as necessary. Okay, so I'm going to carry on with working across this big section here, and then I'm going to show you what I mean by branching off here with different threads. Like to just wrap my threads around the magnets and keep them taut, and that way you're less likely to get them tangled with the thread you're currently stitching with. End is coming up again. There. Okay, so another row done. I'm gonna do this, and then I'm gonna branch these off as I was talking about earlier. So occasionally I will have to go out of order, especially when it gets to a complex area that is more confetti. Sometimes it's just unavoidable. You can't keep from closing stitches in. It's too much, more trouble than it is worth. Sometimes because you have two threads sort of crossing over each other. One is coming upwards and one is coming downwards, and there's just no way to do the stitches in order. So sometimes I'll go outside of it. As I say, it's just a guideline, not a rule. There's no stitching police, so yeah. But I do try to avoid it as much as I possibly can. Okay, this thread is going to run out before I run out of stitches to cross, so I'll just start another one. As you can see, there is a lot of this color used in this part of the pattern. So, oh. Okay. Okay, and I'll get another. Okay, and again, going the other way because I need to be able to park in the upper right of the next stitch. So this will be the first branch off. So I'm going to set that aside because it's going to be a while till I get to that thread that is parked right there. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to add another one. Okay. In fact, I have a shorter one that'll be perfect for the next branch. So. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is do these 5. Okay. Okay, and then I'm going to park it right there. Now, I don't want to close in these stitches above, so I'm going to bring out another color. Okay. Ah, very bright blue here. So that was another branch of that color there. Okay, so do these 6 here. And we'll see if it's long enough to park or not. So yeah, as you can see, my diagonal is not a perfect diagonal. It's sort of a basic outline. But like I've said, I am not strict with it. It's just a rough guide for me. I tried parking in rows and columns, and I don't know, for some reason it wouldn't click in my brain. Diagonal just seems to be the way my brain likes to work, so yeah. Unless the colors are actually going vertical like they were in my last in those areas I ended up parking more column. But also apparently some people say that diagonal is less likely to cause lines. Again, I haven't had a problem with lines, but you never know. So 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So park that there. I'm going to unthread it for a while because it's in the next diagonal. Okay, so back to this color. We'll finish off this branch of the color. Yeah, because this is just right for 3 stitches. And then I'll make the third branch. So okay. So then for my last branch of this color in this area, get yet another fresh strand. If I could manage to thread my needle, that is. Okay, so then that's 1, 2, 3, 4 past my grid line, just double checking I'm in the right spot. I like to just hold these parked threads down with my finger, and that just keeps them from getting pulled out of place, because that can cause loose stitches if that happens. So. Okay, so that's how I branched off the other colors. As you can see, I'm going to park that there. So this thread is going to carry on here. This other thread that is parked is going to carry on down that way. And then I might even end up with another branching off right about here. So sort of decide as I get there. So then I'm going to do this one that I parked earlier. Okay, now that's why I left it threaded, because I knew I was going to come back to it. Okay, and then again, I'm not going to do that row yet. I'm going to do these stitches that are to the left of it first. So as you can see, this is turning into more of a diagonal again as I carry on downwards. So yeah, I'm not always working down from the top row that way. I'm working out from the slanted edge in whatever way makes the most sense to me at the time. So these two, then I'm going to park because I don't want to close in the stitch that is above it. I'm going to drop that needle. I'm going to switch back to this color, do these 3 stitches. I also find stopping to change colors gives my arms enough breaks. I found when I just did tons of one color without changing colors, my arms would hurt by the end of the day. So it was a little faster, but then yeah, I paid for it later. So I find this gives me enough breaks of dropping the thread, marking my pattern, switching to a new color, and then picking up the new thread. That gives me enough of a break that I don't get the repetitive stress injury. So do these 3. Park. Switch back to this color. Stitch that and park. So yeah, as I said, once I have the threads attached, it doesn't take as long, especially as I leave the things threaded. It's just drop one, grab another, drop that, grab another. Yeah, and I really like how nice and neat my stitching looks when I do this, and I don't have any missed stitches that I have to fill in later. I found when I used my old way, which was not parking, it would go really fast at first, and then when I got to the end of a section, I was having to search out all those little stitches you missed along the way, and that really slowed me down. So, and I make fewer counting errors this way. I still will make some because I'm not perfect, but so then I'm going to go back up here and carry on with this thread. And like I said, I'm probably going to end up with another branch here. So I don't care about the back of my work being perfectly neat. I find it's fairly neat with this method. I had a video where I showed the back of my work, and yeah, it's not perfect, but I don't think it's the messiest I've ever seen either, so. It lies nice and flat, which is the biggest thing for me. I don't want it to have lumps and bumps that might make it look weird when it is mounted. Yeah, so again, I'm gonna probably branch this off. Of course, I may run out of thread before that becomes an issue. We will see. Because I don't want to park it all the way over here. That's quite a long carry, and it doesn't really make sense when there are stitches right close by to be done. So that's why I branch off with separate threads that way. I don't like wasting threads, so I find this is the most efficient way for me. So yeah, then I'm going to park this right here and start a new one for this branch of this color here. So it's in a somewhat diagonal direction, not a sharp straight line, but I don't mind that. So these 4 here. Cut a little trimmed bit there. There we go. All right, and then you know what happens next, right? Not doing these stitches because I don't want to, oops, I don't want to close in this one here. So we're switching back to that color. Then we're switching back to this light blue, the hollow circle symbol stitch. So do this and park. Switch back to this color and carry on that way. So, and then of course, once I get there, I will just come to the back to the top and carry on, do the next diagonal and the next one and the next one. And I go until what fits comfortably in my frame. So for me, that is about 60 rows on this count. And then at that point, I just sort of cut it off there and leave a straight line and just carry onwards that way. I did make another video showing what I do when I run out of room, how I end a diagonal, and I will post a link to that in case you want to see that as well. But I hope that makes it all clear. And if you have any questions, please just feel free to leave a comment. I'll do my best to answer it for you. And I hope you learned something today. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and thank you so much for watching. All right, thanks everyone. Bye.